He told her he wanted to feel her inside him, not the other way around. He said it standing in the middle of a marble hallway that cost more than her entire life, his voice low and certain and devastating, like a man confessing something sacred. She was holding a mop. He was holding an empire. And in that impossible, electric moment between them, something cracked open inside Baek Do-hyun that had been sealed shut for years. Something that would cost him everything. And save him completely. Welcome, fam. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Her name was Nia Adeyemi, and she was not supposed to be here. That was the thought that followed her through every hallway of the Baek Tower, trailing behind her like a second shadow. She was not supposed to be cleaning the 42nd floor at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. She was not supposed to be the only person in a building full of terrified employees who wasn't afraid of the man on the penthouse level. And she was absolutely not supposed to have bumped directly into him, spilling an entire bucket of soapy water across the pristine floor of the executive corridor, soaking the hem of his 300,001 trousers, while he was on the phone with someone who, judging by the silence that fell afterward, was probably already dead. Baek Do-hyun lowered his phone slowly. He looked at the water spreading across the marble floor. Then he looked at her. Nia did not run. That surprised her later, looking back. Every instinct she owned should have sent her sprinting for the service elevator. She had heard the stories. Everyone in Seoul had heard the stories about Baek Do-hyun, the youngest head of the Baek crime syndicate in 3 generations. A man who had dismantled a rival organization so completely and so quietly that its members had simply ceased to exist one by one over the course of 18 months, like stars winking out of a sky. A man whose public face was the CEO of Baek Group, a legitimate conglomerate covering pharmaceuticals, real estate, and technology, and whose private face nobody had ever seen clearly enough to describe and lived comfortably afterward. She did not run. She straightened her spine instead, met his eyes, said, "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll have this cleaned up immediately." Do-hyun looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. She counted because she needed something to hold on to in that moment. Then he walked away without a word. The following morning, she found out she'd been reassigned to the penthouse level permanently. She should have quit. Any reasonable person would have quit. Nia knew this the same way she knew her own heartbeat, steady and certain and impossible to ignore. But reasonable was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Her mother's treatment wasn't cheap. The rent on the small apartment in Mapo wasn't cheap. And the cleaning agency had just bumped their penthouse rate by 40%, which meant that Nia, specifically, had just become 40% less able to say no to things that scared her. So she went back. The penthouse was its own universe. 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River on 3 sides, the city spread below like scattered embers. The furniture was sparse and devastatingly expensive, chosen by someone who understood that real power never needed to announce itself loudly. A single orchid on the kitchen counter. A painting on the far wall that Nia recognized, somehow, as a piece that had been reported stolen from a private collection in Paris 4 years ago. She said nothing about the painting. She cleaned around it. For 3 days Do-hyun was almost never there. She moved through the penthouse like a ghost, learning its geography, its silences, the way the light changed over the river at different hours. She told herself she was not looking for him. She was learning the space she had to clean. That was all. On the 4th day, he was sitting at the kitchen counter when she arrived at 7 in the morning. He was in a dark suit already, tie loosened at the collar, reading something on a tablet. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside him, steam rising in a thin, perfect column. He did not look up when she came in. She started at the far end of the room, the way she always did. Methodical, quiet, professional. "You were a nurse," he said. Nia's hands went still on the cloth she was holding. She turned. He was still looking at his tablet. "Pardon me?" He turned the tablet around. On the screen was what appeared to be her complete employment history going back 7 years. Adeyemi Nia, previously employed as a licensed practical nurse at Asen Medical Center. Resigned 18 months ago. Current employment, Premier Clean Solutions, staff level 3. He set the tablet down. Why are you here instead of there? She stared at him. He was asking her this like it was a reasonable question. Like it was not an extraordinary violation of her privacy. Like he had not just casually displayed that he'd had her investigated, probably within hours of her spilling that water on his floor. Family circumstances, she said, her voice completely steady. Is there anything you need cleaned, sir? He looked at her for the first time since she'd come in. Really looked, the way he had in the hallway that first night, those dark eyes moving across her face like he was reading something written there that she didn't know about. Then he picked up his coffee, took a sip, and went back to his tablet. She went back to cleaning, but her hands were not steady anymore. She didn't know what to do with the feeling sitting in her chest, something dense and warm and entirely unwelcome. She cleaned faster. Later that week, she mentioned to her colleague Bora that the penthouse assignment was strange. Just strange, she said carefully. The man barely speaks. Bora stared at her.
Nia.
Do you know who that man is? Yes.
No.
Bora said. You know his name. You don't know who he is. She lowered her voice. 3 months ago, a cleaner on the 28th floor told one of the secretaries something she overheard in the executive boardroom. 1 month later, that cleaner moved to Busan. No forwarding address. No notice given to the agency.
Just gone.
Nia kept her expression neutral. I understand.
Do you?
Because the way you just said that tells me you're going to keep going up there, and I just need you to know that I think you're the bravest or the most reckless person I've ever met, and I genuinely cannot tell which one. Nia went back the next morning. She went back because she needed the money. She went back because she was not the kind of woman who let fear make her decisions. And she went back. In a corner of herself she refused to examine closely because of the way he had looked at her in the corridor that first night. Not like a man looking at a cleaning woman. Not like a man looking at a problem to be managed. Like a man looking at something he hadn't expected to find. Something that unsettled him in the specific, private way that only true surprises can. Baek Do-hyun, in his 41st floor office that same morning, was pretending to read a contract. His head of security, Jang Tae-soo, had placed a single photograph on his desk 40 minutes ago. The photograph was from the internal camera in the penthouse kitchen. It showed Nia Adeyemi at the counter, her back to the lens, her shoulders rounded slightly over something she was rearranging. The photograph was completely ordinary. There was nothing remarkable about it at all. Do-hyun had looked at it for 37 minutes. He pushed it face down and picked up the contract. She is a cleaning employee, he told himself. Assigned to his floor by the agency. There was nothing unusual about her presence. He had had her background checked because he had everyone who entered the penthouse checked, always, without exception. The information about her nursing background was relevant only from a security standpoint. It told him she had competence and composure under pressure. That was useful to know. It was practical information. That was all it was. He initialed the contract and did not think about the way she'd looked at him when he turned the tablet around. The complete absence of flinching. The steadiness in her eyes. The precise, deliberate way she had redirected the conversation without an ounce of apology or submission in her voice. He did not think about it at all. The photograph stayed face down on his desk for the rest of the day. Tae-soo, who had worked for Do-hyun for 9 years, and was one of perhaps 4 people on Earth who had some partial access to what the man was actually thinking, noticed. He said nothing. But when he left the office that evening, there was something in his expression that, if you caught it from exactly the right angle in exactly the right light, resembled the very early stages of relief. The following Monday, Nia arrived to find the orchid on the kitchen counter had been replaced. In its place sat a small potted plant she recognized immediately, a peace lily, the kind hospitals kept because of their air-purifying qualities. The kind that practically maintained itself. The kind a nurse would know how to keep alive, without thinking about it. There was no note. She stood in front of it for a long moment, set her bag down, touched one of the dark green leaves very gently. Then she went and got her cleaning supplies and started work, and she told herself that the warmth spreading through her sternum was nothing. Was gratitude for a thoughtful gesture by an employer she barely knew. Was entirely impersonal. She told herself this until she almost believed it. 3 days later, she found a protein bar on the counter beside the peace lily. Still in its wrapper, expensive brand, the kind sold at the health food shop around the corner from the tower. It was 9 in the morning. She hadn't eaten since 6. She had been running late and had skipped breakfast and hadn't thought anyone knew or would notice. She ate the protein bar standing at the counter, looking out at the river. She didn't say anything to him about it the next time she saw him, but she didn't pretend it hadn't happened either. She left her empty wrapper in the bin under the counter, perfectly visible, not hidden. A small, quiet acknowledgement. I saw what you did. Thank you. That afternoon, Do-hyun's calendar showed 3 back-to-back meetings with the heads of the Beck Group subsidiaries, followed by a call with someone in Tokyo whose name appeared only as a set of initials in the system. He sat through all of it. He responded when spoken to. He made decisions that would move millions of one and hundreds of lives in various directions. He was, by every measurable standard, completely present. At some point during the Tokyo call, he found himself wondering if she'd eaten anything else that day. He ended the call 7 minutes early. His assistant, who had worked for him for 3 years and had never once seen him end a call before its natural conclusion, said nothing but quietly moved 2 of tomorrow's meetings 30 minutes further apart. She didn't know why she did it. It just seemed like the kind of day where margins might be needed. The danger arrived on a Thursday, the way danger always seemed to in Nia's life. Without warning. Without the decency of building slowly, so she could prepare. She was on her way out of the building when she heard them. 2 men in the service corridor near the loading dock, speaking in Korean too fast for her to follow fully, but she caught enough. A name. Her name, rendered awkward and foreign in someone else's mouth. And another name. Baek Do-hyun. And a third thing that she understood not with her brain but with her body, with the cold that flooded down her spine and the way her feet stopped moving entirely. Someone had been watching her. Someone who was not Do-hyun. Someone who knew her schedule on the penthouse floor and wanted information about what she saw up there. She backed away from the corridor quietly. Professionally. Like a woman who had not just heard anything at all. But her hands were shaking by the time she reached the street. She did not tell Do-hyun. She told herself this was because it was probably nothing. 2 employees talking. Possibly unrelated. She was reading too much into fragments of a language she only partially understood. She was catastrophizing. She told herself this. She did not believe it. The next morning, Do-hyun was standing at the window when she arrived. The city stretched below him in the pale early light, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn around. You seem afraid today, he said. She set her bag down. I'm fine. Liar. The word came out flat and matter-of-fact, not cruel, not accusing, just accurate. She pressed her lips together. 2 men in the service corridor yesterday evening, she said finally. They knew my name. The silence that followed was extremely loud. Do-hyun turned from the window. His face was utterly calm. That specific, trained calm that she was beginning to understand was more dangerous than any expression of anger. What exactly did they say? She told him. All of it. Every fragment she'd caught. He listened without interrupting, his eyes on her face the entire time with an intensity that was almost unbearable, but that she refused to look away from because she was not going to be a woman who flinched in front of this man. She had decided that on day 1, and she was not revising it now. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You should have told me immediately. I was uncertain about what I heard. You were certain enough that your hands are still not completely steady, he said. She looked down. They weren't. She curled them at her sides. I'll have it handled, Do-hyun said. He turned back to the window. You are not to use the service corridor after 6 p.m. Use the main lobby exit. Check in with Tae-soo before you leave. She stared at his back. You're giving me a bodyguard protocol. I'm giving you a common sense procedure. Those are the same thing in your world. He said nothing. She picked up her supplies. Do you know who they were? Yes, he said simply. The single word carried the specific weight of a man who had already made decisions she would never be consulted about. She understood, standing there in the early light with the city sprawling beneath them both, that she was now inside something she had not agreed to enter. That the moment she had looked up at him in the corridor that first night without running, She had stepped through a door that she hadn't even seen. She wasn't sure, she was afraid of where it led. That was the problem. That afternoon, Do-hyun called Tae-soo into his office and closed the door. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Tae-soo emerged looking like a man who had just received a very precise set of instructions and intended to carry them out with extreme thoroughness. What nobody outside that room knew, what even Tae-soo only partially understood, was that Do-hyun had not called the meeting because Nia was strategically useful or because her proximity to the penthouse made her a liability that needed managing. He had called it because the image of her standing in the corridor at dusk with her hands shaking and her chin up had done something to him that he was not going to examine directly for another several weeks. He was a man who processed facts quickly and emotions at geological speed. He knew the difference. He also knew that the men in the corridor belonged to Shin Kyung-han. Shin Kyung-han. The name sat like a stone in Do-hyun's chest. Head of the Shin Syndicate, the only organization in Seoul that had chosen not to negotiate with the Baek family after Do-hyun's father died and the consolidation began. Shin had waited.
Watched.
Probed the edges of the Baek empire for 3 years, looking for a crack wide enough to lever open. He was patient in the specific way that truly dangerous men were patient, not passive but coiled, conserving energy for the exact right moment. And now he had noticed Nia, which meant he had noticed that Do-hyun noticed Nia, which was a problem because Do-hyun had been careful. Exceptional careful. He had not changed any protocols, had not reassigned any security personnel to her directly, had not done anything that could be read from the outside as evidence of personal investment in the cleaning woman on his floor. And yet somehow Shin had still noticed, which meant Do-hyun was less composed about this than he believed, which was the most unsettling information he had received in a very long time. 2 days later, a man named Park Sung-yeon arrived on the 43rd floor. Nia had no idea who he was. He appeared while she was cleaning the study, stepping off the private elevator with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was welcome everywhere. He was around Do-hyun's age, handsome in a practiced and very deliberate way, and he looked at Nia the way some men looked at things they thought they might want to acquire. "Good morning," he said in accented English. He had clearly noticed she wasn't Korean. "Are you new? I don't remember seeing you here before." "I work here." "Yes," she said neutrally and turned back to the bookshelf she was organizing. He came further into the room. "What a waste," he said, and his tone was light and teasing and entirely horrible. "A woman like you, cleaning floors. Someone should be taking care of you instead." She turned to face him fully. "Someone should probably also knock before entering a room that isn't theirs," she said pleasantly. Park Sung-yeon blinked, then smiled wider, like she'd done something delightful. Do-hyun walked in at that exact moment. The room changed. It was the only accurate way to describe what happened. The entire quality of the air shifted when he entered, and Park Sung-yeon turned with a grin that was already explaining itself, already beginning to make the situation charming and harmless and easily dismissed. He never got to finish. Do-hyun had looked at Nia first, one quick read of her expression. Then he had looked at Sung-yeon, and whatever he found in Sung-yeon's face made his jaw tighten in a way so subtle that only someone who had been watching him very carefully for weeks would have caught it.
"Sung-yeon," he said.
"The boardroom."
"Now."
He didn't look at Nia again before he left. But as he passed through the doorway, he stopped for exactly 1 beat and said quietly, without turning around, his voice low enough that only she could hear it, "You don't have to speak to anyone who makes you uncomfortable. Ever. On this floor." Then he was gone. Nia stood in the middle of the study with a book in her hand and something she absolutely refused to name crackling warm and dangerous through her entire body. Park Sung-yeon was a junior associate with connections to 2 of the Baek subsidiary boards. He was in the legitimate world, someone Do-hyun had to manage carefully. In the boardroom that morning, Do-hyun was precise and professional and said nothing whatsoever about Nia or what had just occurred in the study. He discussed the associates' quarterly reporting responsibilities in detail and ended the meeting in under 20 minutes. Tae-soo, who had accompanied Do-hyun to the boardroom, noted that Do-hyun spent 7 of those 20 minutes looking at the window with the specific expression he wore when he was deciding how to remove something from a situation permanently. Tae-soo did not ask. He simply made a quiet note to check whether Park Sung-yeon had any upcoming requests to access the penthouse level and began, in his methodical way, to make sure those requests encountered administrative obstacles. He was, after all, very good at his job. A few days later, Nia found a small velvet case on the kitchen counter, beside the peace lily, beside where the protein bar had been. She stared at it for a long time without touching it. Then she opened it. Inside was a simple bracelet, slim and dark and understated, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were already looking. On the inside of the clasp, barely visible, was a small tracking chip. She closed the case, set it down, walked to the window, stood there looking at the river for what felt like a long time. Then she went and found her phone and sent a text to the number Tae-soo had given her for building security queries. Tell him, she typed carefully, that I am not a package to be tracked. She waited. 3 minutes later, a reply. Mr. Beck says, you are correct. You are not a package. The chip can be removed. The bracelet itself was selected for a different reason. If you don't want it, leave it on the counter. He will understand. She picked it up again, turned it over in her hands. It was beautiful in its quietness. It did not announce itself. It simply existed with quality and restraint and the kind of attention to detail that meant someone had thought about her specifically. She put it in her pocket. She told herself she would think about whether to wear it. She was wearing it by the time she reached the lobby. She hated how much she liked it. The crisis arrived 2 weeks later without warning, the way all real crises did. Nia was in the service stairwell at 7:40 in the morning, earlier than her usual time, having come in to cover for a colleague. She heard the door behind her open. Then something cold pressed against the back of her neck, and a voice in Korean told her not to move. She did not scream. She thought, with a clarity that surprised her, about how her mother was expecting a call at noon. Then she thought about the bracelet on her wrist. She pressed the clasp. The stairwell erupted 40 seconds later. 3 of Do-hyun's security team came through 2 separate doors simultaneously, and the man behind Nia found himself on the floor with a speed that suggested he had profoundly misjudged the situation. Nia was moved to the side, her back against the wall, Tae-soo's hand on her shoulder firm and certain and steady. Are you hurt?
Tae-soo asked. No.
He nodded.
Come with me.
Do-hyun was in the Security Operations Center 2 floors below the penthouse when they brought her in. He was standing over a bank of monitors, and he turned the moment the door opened. His eyes went to her face first, her throat, her hands, reading her body the way a doctor checked a patient, methodical and complete. Then something shifted in his expression, something that was not professionalism. He crossed the room to her in 3 strides and stopped a foot away. Too close for a professional interaction. Close enough that she could see exactly what was happening behind those dark, composed eyes. The controlled fury. The relief. The other thing, the one that had been building since the corridor on the first night, the one that he had been managing and containing and refusing to acknowledge directly. She looked up at him. Her chin was level. Her eyes were steady, but her hands were shaking again.
He saw them.
Without a word, he reached out and took both her hands in his, wrapping them completely in the warm, sure grip of his fingers, and she felt the shaking slow. I told you, he said quietly. Service corridor. After 6. She swallowed. It was before 6. He looked at her. Something shifted further. He was still holding her hands. He had not let go. The security team was present in the room, but they had all developed a sudden and comprehensive interest in the monitors. You pressed it, he said. The clasp.
Yes.
Why did you keep it? She looked at him for a long moment. Because someone thought about me specifically, she said. And I'm not used to that. The room was very quiet. Do-hyun's hands tightened fractionally around hers. Not much. Just enough. Shin Kyung-han made his move on a Friday. He was, as Do-hyun had always known he would be, intelligent about it. He did not come at the Beck Empire through the front. He went through the media. A story appeared Friday morning in 2 separate online outlets simultaneously, the coordination too clean to be coincidence. The story alleged that Baek Do-hyun had formed an inappropriate relationship with a foreign national cleaning employee, that he was using her as a courier for illegal financial documents, and that she had entered South Korea on a fraudulent work visa arranged by a Baek subsidiary. Every single word was a lie. The lies were excellent. Specific, detailed, supported by documents that looked almost real unless you knew exactly what to look for. The kind of lies that required months of preparation and a professional forger and an information network reaching deep enough into the right places to plant the seeds before anyone knew to look for them. Nia read the story on her phone at 8 in the morning in her apartment in Mapo. She read it twice. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and felt the specific vertigo of a person watching their life be rewritten by someone else's hand. Her phone started ringing. Numbers she didn't recognize. The agency. A journalist. Her colleague Bora, who was texting in rapid bursts of alarm and concern. She turned the phone face down. She was at the tower by 9. Tae-soo met her at the lobby. His face told her the situation was serious. She already knew. He took her upstairs, not to the penthouse but to a conference room on the 38th floor where 3 men in suits were working over laptops with the focused energy of a team running out of time. Do-hyun was at the head of the table. He looked up when she walked in. She looked back at him. "I want to be clear," she said, "before anyone speaks. I understand what this is. I understand you didn't cause this intentionally. I am not afraid, and I am not leaving until we figure out what to do next." Something in his face went very still. One of the suited men started to say something about safe accommodation, about the agency, about legal representation that would be arranged on her behalf. Do-hyun cut him off with a single gesture. "Leave us," he said. Everyone left. The door clicked shut. The silence in the conference room was different from the silence in the penthouse. It was loaded with weeks of unspoken things, with the accumulated weight of protein bars and peace lilies, and a bracelet chosen with care, and 2 hands held in a security room while the world outside crackled with danger. She looked at him from across the table. He looked at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I walked into this building. I kept coming back. You didn't know what you were walking into." "Neither did you," she said quietly. He went still in a different way now. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his reactions. The stillness of a man who had just heard something that reached somewhere very deep and true. He walked around the table. Stopped in front of her. Close, the way he'd been close in the security room, close enough that she could see his breathing had changed. "The people who published that story work for Shin Kyung-han," he said. "He has been trying to dismantle my family's position in this city for 3 years. He saw you as a way to reach me, which means he saw what I was trying not to show." She held very still. "What were you trying not to show?" Do-hyun looked at her. Looked at her the way he had looked at her in the corridor on the first night, like he was reading something written in a language he'd forgotten he knew. "That you matter to me," he said. "That you have mattered to me since the moment you looked at me without flinching." He paused. "I have spent a considerable amount of effort trying to make that invisible. I was not successful." She exhaled slowly. "No, you were not." He reached up. His fingers found the line of her jaw, the same careful deliberateness as always, not tentative but measured, like a man choosing each motion with full intention. "I need to know," he said quietly, "whether I have misread this." She looked at him. Her heart was doing something complicated and loud. "You investigated me before you said good morning to me," she said. "That would be a problem with any reasonable person." "Yes." "You put a tracking chip in jewelry without asking me first." "Yes." "You are a frightening person who does frightening things in the dark, and I work for you, which is an objectively terrible foundation for anything." "Also yes." She looked at him. He looked back. Patient and honest and not even slightly apologetic, because he was a man who did not do apology by instinct. He did acknowledgement. He did accuracy. He did standing in front of you, with his full self visible and waiting. "But you thought about me specifically," she said finally. "Every time. The plant. The food. The bracelet. You were thinking about specifically me." "Always," he said. "From the first night. I couldn't stop." She closed the distance between them, pressed her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. It was not as steady as he looked. Then do something about Shin, she said. And then we'll talk about the rest. His hand covered hers on his chest.
We will, he said.
He destroyed Shin Kyung-han in 11 days. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. There were no public confrontations or visible acts of warfare. Do Hyun was not a man who wasted motion. He moved through Shin's network methodically, surgically, calling in debts and alliances accumulated over years, turning the man's own organization against him piece by piece until Shin was standing on the outside of everything he'd built with nothing solid left beneath his feet. The false story collapsed under a very detailed counter-disclosure of its own, including the origin of the fabricated documents, the name of the forger, and the financial trail connecting all of it back to Shin's private accounts. The story did not need to be loud. The right people saw it. The right people understood. Shin Kyung-han left Seoul 2 weeks later. Quietly. With considerably less than he'd arrived with. Do Hyun watched him go from the window of the penthouse. Then he turned around to find Nia sitting at his kitchen counter, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, looking at him with a particular expression she had developed recently, the one that was equal parts warmth and maddening composure. Is it done?
She asked.
He sat across from her.
Yes.
She nodded, took a sip of tea. How's your mother? He asked. Nia looked up. It was the first time he had asked directly. He had arranged for a consultation at the best specialist clinic in Seoul 3 weeks ago, quietly, through channels, without making it a thing she needed to thank him for. She had let him because she was a woman who knew the difference between accepting help and surrendering ground. She's better, Nia said. The new medication is working.
Good.
She watched him. He was looking at his hands. You're not very good at the soft parts, she observed. No, he said without hesitation. But you keep doing them anyway. He looked up. His eyes were very direct.
Yes.
She put down her cup, stood up, walked around the counter, and stopped in front of him the way he had stopped in front of her in the conference room, close and deliberate and absolutely certain.
He stood.
Because he was that kind of man. He stood and faced her. She put her hands on either side of his face. He went very still. She could feel the tension running through him, all that controlled power held in perfect check, waiting. I want to feel you, she said softly. And she meant all of it. His weight in her world. His thoughts in her mornings. His hands that brought her food when she hadn't eaten, and a plant he thought she'd know how to keep alive. All the soft, careful things that a man who was supposed to be made entirely of iron kept doing again and again when nobody was officially watching. His eyes closed for just a moment. When they opened again, something had changed in them. Something had come forward that was always there but carefully kept behind glass. He pulled her against him. His arms came around her completely, and she felt the full solid certainty of being held by someone who intended to keep holding. His face went into her hair. She felt him breathe. The Han River spread below them, silver and indifferent and eternal. The city hummed. The penthouse held them both in its quiet, expensive light. Everything else faded out. What happened after, the long, slow hours that followed, belonged entirely to them. The city moved on outside the windows, unconcerned and continuous. And in the space between them, something sealed itself shut around them both, permanent and chosen and real. She left before dawn. She did it without thinking, moved by an old reflex, the fear of being too much, of taking up space she hadn't been invited to keep. She was in the elevator before she fully knew she was going. The bracelet was on her wrist. The peace lily was on the counter behind her. And the thing expanding in her chest felt too enormous and too fragile to exist in the same room as full daylight. She told herself she needed to think. She told herself she needed air. She was 3 blocks from the tower when her phone rang. Do Hyun. She answered on the second ring. You left, he said. Yes, she said.
Why?
She stopped walking, stood on the pavement with the early morning city quiet around her, the air cool and clean and smelling faintly of the river. Because I don't know what I am to you, she said, and her voice came out much more honest than she intended. In the mornings. In the real, ordinary, regular mornings going forward. I know what I was tonight. I don't know what I am tomorrow. A pause. Then come back. Do-hyun. Come back, he said again. Quietly, the same tone he used for everything, that low certainty that was not a demand but was also not quite a request. It was something in between. The tone of a man stating a fact about himself that he would no longer maintain as a secret. Come back, Mia. And I will tell you exactly what you are to me. Every morning.
For as long as you'll let me.
She stood on the pavement for one more moment. Then she turned around. She was back in the elevator before she let herself feel it, that enormous, terrifying, absolutely certain thing. The doors opened on the 43rd floor. He was standing in the entrance of the penthouse, tie gone, jacket gone, just him in the early dark light with his whole self forward and visible. She walked toward him. He met her halfway. She came back, she said.
You always come back, he said.
Even when you think you shouldn't. She looked up at him. You always wait. He touched her face.
Yes.
The months that followed were not without difficulty. Nothing real ever is. The agency questioned her reassignment. Certain members of the Beck board questioned Do-hyun's judgment. Society, which had opinions about everything and the attention span of a minor storm, talked for 3 weeks and then moved on to something else. Mia's mother met Do-hyun at a dinner he cooked himself in the Mapo apartment, standing in a kitchen that cost less than the handle on his penthouse cabinet door, attempting a jollof rice recipe he had watched 7 tutorial videos to prepare. It was slightly overcooked. He presented it with the same exact composure he presented everything. Mia's mother said it was fine. Then she looked at him for a long time with the particular eyes of a woman who has survived enough to know what genuine care looked like when it sat across her table. She told her daughter afterward, "He is serious about you. I can see it in how much he was willing to look foolish."
Mia laughed. Yes, she said. He is.
On a morning in early spring, Do-hyun called her to the penthouse, and she found the kitchen counter completely cleared of everything except one thing. A small white box. Simple. No bow. She looked at him. He was standing at the window, his back to her, and he spoke to the river first. "I don't do this well," he said. "The soft parts. I've told you that." "You've gotten better," she said. He turned. In his hand was the small white box, and when she opened it, there was a ring inside. Not elaborate. Not declarative. Clean and dark and beautiful in exactly the way the bracelet had been, with the same specific attention to her specifically. Chosen by someone who had looked at her long enough and carefully enough to know. He didn't kneel. He wasn't that kind of man. He stood in front of her with the full weight of himself and said, "I want you in my life completely. Not in the mornings and not occasionally. Completely and permanently. You can keep your name. You can go back to nursing if you want. I'll ensure you have everything you need. You can do anything you want. I just want to be in the room while you do it." Her eyes were burning. She was going to be furious about that later. "You want to feel me," she said softly. "In your life." His eyes were very dark and very warm. "Always," he said. "From the very first night." She took the ring from the box, held it, looked at it, then held it out to him. "Put it on," she said. He took her hand, slid it onto her finger. His hands were not steady. 2 seasons later, in a small ceremony on the 43rd floor with the Han River below and the city spread out like all the world's light gathered into one place, Baek Do-hyun and Nia Adeyemi were married by a registrar who had been asked, specifically, to make it brief. She wore something simple. He wore black. She held a single orchid because someone had noticed she always glanced at the one on the kitchen counter when she first came in each morning. Tae-soo cried silently in the corner and would deny it for the rest of his professional life. That winter, Do-hyun came home to find Nia sitting on the kitchen counter, her feet dangling, looking at something small she held in both hands. He came up behind her, looked over her shoulder. She turned the small white test around so he could see it. 2 lines. The sound he made was not something he had ever made before. Not in any boardroom or any negotiation or any confrontation in the long and dangerous years of his life. It came from somewhere that had been sealed for so long that he'd stopped believing it was there at all. He put his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him. They stayed that way for a long time, with the city glowing beyond the glass and the peace lily on the counter, and the world continuing, indifferent and enormous, outside the warm, enclosed reality of everything they had chosen. He had told her he wanted to feel her inside his life, permanently and completely. She had thought she understood what he meant. She understood now. It was this. All of it. The impossible, ordinary weight of being truly known by another person. The terrifying, irreversible, absolutely necessary act of letting someone matter enough to shatter you open and find something growing in the space where the damage was. She turned in his arms and looked at his face. He was not composed. Not even slightly. Good, she thought. Neither was she. Neither of them ever really had been. They had just been two people standing in a corridor at the wrong time, getting it exactly right.